I will confirm once we have contact. I will confirm once we have contact. All right, we are live. I will confirm once we have contact.
Good morning, everyone. I think we are online now. So welcome to the session on AI and AI for good and AI for social impact. We have today around the table Laila, who is the CEO. I mean, I will let everybody introduce himself or herself, but just to give you like an idea, we have Laila, who is the CEO of a company using AI in HR. Then we have Marc Flamand, who is the CEO of a company supporting families and corporations in their philanthropy and social impact activities. Then Nathaniel Ackerman, who is going to join us very soon, who is the lead of AI for Belgium, and then myself. I'm the CEO of Dalberg Data Insights. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute or two. So the goal of this session is really to share a view and to have a discussion about what would be artificial intelligence for social impact, why do we need data governance, and what are potential funding models, because social impact typically lacks a market for funding. And so we need to be creative about that, and Marc is going to share his experience about it, and then we can after everybody has shared his or her view about social impact funding and some other topics, we're going to move into a discussions around topics such as what are the risks, what would be the role of the state, how to engage more citizens, etc., etc. So that's really the goal and the setup of the current conversation. We're going to have 1 hour to discuss about all these things. But first of all, I would like to leave the floor to each of the participants to introduce himself or herself. And maybe let's start with you, Laila. And please take 2 minutes to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you're doing, and what's your interest here, and what do you want to talk about? And then we can move to Marc, and then to myself.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much, Frédéric. So good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be there with you all today. As Frédéric mentioned, so I'm Laila, CEO of BigRadar, founder of BigRadar. We've actually launched BigRadar last year after we realized that there was a real need to actually use AI and technology in HR and make sure that we can help and support companies with technologies to make their talent management practices much more inclusive and fight inequalities in the workplace. So that's a bit what we would talk about today regarding my presentation. And then we can even go forward regarding ethics and the role of states. And we have a couple of questions that we can cover on that matter. I will leave the floor to Marc.
Thank you, Laila. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Marc Flamand. I'm the founder of Telos Impact. We are a leading advisory firm in the field of philanthropy and impact investing. So basically, we advise corporates, families willing to engage for a better world. Therefore, we either advise or manage foundations or impact investing funds in different topics. Would it be from education, environment, mental health? And basically what happens is that most of our clients are now looking for having a more systemic impact on the topics they want to address. Therefore, AI might be one of the solutions for that. Thank you. Maybe Nathaniel?
Maybe myself first. Yeah. Nathaniel, do you want? Oh, I didn't see that you were there. Nathaniel, do you want to introduce yourself? Please go ahead.
Okay, but I'm here. I was supposed to moderate this session, but I think you can do it. You can do it without me. But I can participate if you want to the panel. I don't know. So I'm the responsible for AI for Belgium, and I'm expert in AI and innovation at the Federal Public Services strategy and support. That's all.
Hello, is it me? Is it me? Okay. Good morning. So my name is Frédéric Pivetta. I'm the CEO of Dalberg Data Insights. Dalberg Data Insights is a company working globally through the Dalberg group, working on using technology to improve the life of people around the globe. And that improvement can happen through many ways. It could be a strategic work, an advisory work. It could be tech-based. It could be AI-based. So, for instance, we use satellite images to predict food crises, but we also use telecom data to predict the gender and to improve the inclusion, I would say, of different segments of population in many countries. So, for instance, we have been working on using telecom data to identify all the women in Ghana or in Bangladesh, so that we can then target them later with specific financial products, so that we increase the financial inclusion of these of women, and we basically reduce the gender gap in these countries and in these populations. So yeah, so I think everybody has been introducing himself. So should we maybe move to the first topic, so that we and I will start sharing my screen for that. Just give me a second. Sorry about that. Oh, here you go. So, social impact, I will just drive everybody here. Making full screen. Okay, so talking about AI and social impact, and I will just take a few minutes here to explain a little bit what the view is on AI and social impact, and also just talk a little bit more of the context. And the context is the following. I'm not only the CEO of Dalberg Data Insights, I'm also the lead for AI for Good in the AI for Belgium organization. So that means that the AI for Belgium organization is meant to basically drive the AI strategy for the country in Belgium. And my role in that organization is to drive a very narrow, I would say, although very broad, but very narrow vertical around AI for good, which means how to use artificial intelligence for social impact. And I will later on, I'm going to share my view about data governance in that context. But here, my goal is really to share what I mean and what we mean by using AI for social impact. And AI for social impact, I mean, that's part of a larger and broader context. It's like we see that the world has been increasingly digital during the COVID crisis. And here you can see on my screen, you can see numbers showing that. These numbers are coming from McKinsey and Deloitte, showing how the world has become increasingly digital and how data have been created over time. So that means that the post-COVID world is going to become much more digital than the pre-COVID world. And you can see that at the bottom center of my screen, where you basically see the average daily China offline consumption. So you can imagine what it means in a post-COVID world, because that's basically, that gives you already a picture of what the post-COVID world will look like. You see from March 2020, which is like after the COVID-19 peak, what happened in China. It's not that the offline consumption has been back to the same level as before the COVID crisis. So people have been working increasingly from home. So the digital way of working, the digital way of consumption has been percolating across society in general. And this is what I'm trying to illustrate here. So that means the world is going to become increasingly digital. What do we, in that context, what do we mean by social impact? Essentially two things. We do what we do, or I do what I do, because I have been observing a lot of market failures across the globe. I mean, my company is working in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and we observe a lot of market failures when it comes to agriculture, to energy access, or financial inclusion, for instance. just taking the example of financial inclusion, if you look at the level of bancarization in countries across the African continent, it's between 20 and 30%, depending on what we talk about, what country exactly we talk about, but roughly in sub-Saharan countries, it's very low. That kind of market failure also happens in more advanced economies like in Belgium. When you think about gender, for instance, there is still a huge, and Laila is going to talk about it, but there's still a huge gap, a huge gender gap when it comes to the labor market, for instance, and when it comes to promoting people across the career path. So my company and my observations are that because there are market failures and because sometimes there are lack of public institutions, we need the social sector to take over some of them. And the social sector has been doing that in a context that is, I would say, vastly non-digital. But as I said before, what we also observe is that the world is becoming increasingly digital. So we should leverage that opportunity in terms of data, in terms of algorithms, in terms of change of behavior, to basically bring the social sector to the next level and also bring the impact of the social sector to the next level. But that requires to do one thing. That requires to basically assume that data are commodities, and data are commodities to solve hard problems. So what we consider here is that telecom data, for instance, are generated by everybody here on this call, and especially during the current call. Satellite images are generated for many purposes. Cars generate data. Banks generate data, and these data are used basically for a single purpose. But what I believe and what many people believe now is that this data can be repurposed in some ways. I mean, for instance, as I said before, telecom data could be used to identify all the women in a country, and to basically increase some targeting, for instance, of the public institutions. Bank data could be used for many purposes. It's not only to make sure that the bank transactions are safe, but it's also to allow people to access credit. Because if I observe your bank transactions, basically what I can see is that you are creditworthy or not. Sorry. So that's an important assumption. Here, I would like now to move into some examples. And what we see is that data have become have come at the core of the public decision making. And this is just one example of what we have been doing, but many people have been doing that across the globe, is the use of telecom data in the context of the health and the public health questions. This is an example of what we have been doing during the COVID-19 crisis, and especially at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. So basically, we create like a data ecosystem with Proximus, Telenet, and Orange in Belgium, Sensano, which is basically the arm of the Ministry of Health, that is responsible for data. We set up an ethics committee. We also have had some links and relations with the Data Protection Authority, and we basically built like a consortium of people that could use data to help and support the government in the decision-making process. And this is an example of output when you see the average mobility that has been dropping between the moment the COVID-19 crisis started until a certain moment in time. And that's really helping the government to make better decisions, because now it can be data and fact-based instead of being survey-based. We could do that in many countries in the world. Here is an example of what we have been doing in Africa, but it's basically the same, doing that in the same spirit as we did in Belgium. Another topic that is really close to my heart and to what AI for Good is doing, and what we are pushing as one of the flagship projects, is everything around gender-based violence. And what we observed, and the starting point of the reflection somehow, is that what we observed is that there exists already something. I mean, it's not that people have been waiting for us to come up with the AI solution to start trying to solve for the gender-based violence problem. For instance, violence against women, or sexual violence, or harassment. Things like that are a really important problem in our society, especially in the context of a COVID crisis context. There exists solution. I mean, these are examples of what we observe in Belgium, and more specifically in Brussels. If you are a victim of sexual violence, you can go through these different services. For instance, violencesexuelle.be, or you can call, you can go through another website which is called ULB Cache or arrête.be. things like that. The problem is that they're only open certain dates and certain days during the week, and they have also limited access time. So basically office hours. And so basically it's not really offering a full set of solutions. Another example of what we saw is that if you are a victim of rape or sexual violence, basically you need to go through a very complex questionnaire. And not only that, basically the solutions tend to focus on rape and I would say highly violent sexual assaults. And so because we saw that maybe having a solution that is automated and based on AI could at least compensate for some of the lacks and the imbalances that we see in the current solutions. For instance, an AI bot can offer solutions around record stories. An AI solutions, after a while, can start connecting these stories and start giving additional insights to the victims or through the authorities. How can we do that using AI? This is an example of things that a chatbot could do. It gives a better overview. It gives better statistics, because one thing that we didn't see in the slides before is that there is like a lack of information when it comes to sexual violence. I mean, a very small portion, a fraction of the sexual violence is reported to the authorities, focusing also on the most violent forms of sexual violence and violence against women. So basically, it should go and lead, and it should lead us towards a higher reporting of sexual violence. So these are examples of what a bot and what an AI solution could help. The thing is that you never work in in isolation. So it's very important to leverage the existing players and build kind of an ecosystem around yourself. So for instance, here we are trying to partner with NGOs that are working on the ground. So we work with Touche pas à ma pote, which is an NGO. We work with AI for the Common Good. We try to work with universities. We also work with AI for Belgium. We have some advisory body leveraging the police, the federal police, for instance. So you never work on your own, and I would say the AI or tech solution, it should not be seen in isolation. I mean, the tech solution is probably a fraction again of what the solution should be. It's a significant fraction, but it's still a fraction. So it's important to also consider the entire ecosystem and try to make it work. And that's going to be the link between what we are talking about, what I'm talking about here, and what I'm going to talk about soon around data governance. So that's the idea. My idea here was to give you a few examples of what we could do using AI for social impact. What we mean by social impact. Why do we think social impact is important today, and working social impact is important today? And now I'm giving the floor to Laila to give and illustrate and give us another example of what we can do by using AI for solving other problems that are around gender, for instance. Laila, over to you.
Thank you, Frédéric. Well, I don't have any presentation because it was quite short, it's 10 minutes. So I'd rather engage with you all and have questions, hopefully, on the chat that we can answer later. So as we mentioned, so I'm actually a social entrepreneur at heart. What matters to me is equal opportunities and accessibility of the workplace, because I believe that we will make this world a better place if everybody is included in it. So I decided to start this journey for a simple reason is, well, firstly, as a woman, I was always considering the fact that there's still a lack of representation of women at C-levels. We can all agree here that talent is evenly distributed in society. So how come these talents are not evenly distributed and represented across different organizations and across levels within that organization? So there's a lot of studies that actually are still live and going on, studies from UNIA, studies from Views Brussels in collaboration with Actiris. There's a lot of studies showing actually that there is still a discrimination happening. There is still some inequalities. And I don't believe that human beings are bad. I don't believe that human beings are all racist and that we all mean to discriminate. And if we take that as a standing ground, then how can we ensure that if the human beings are not bad, that we can still have positive outcomes coming out of human decisions? So we wanted to really focus on the aspect of equity within recruitment, equity within talent management in general. So it started with a simple reflection, that is, if tech is there actually to relieve humans from repetitive and alienating tasks, and that we as humans should really focus on our strengths, and that we really should enhance our capacity, then enrich our full potential, then what is the real use of technology? How is this technology should be actually implemented? And for us, the answer is very simple, is that every hero needs a sidekick, and that sidekick is technology. So the role of a sidekick, everybody knows, it's there to actually provide another point of view, is to provide the skills to the hero, skills that the hero doesn't have. So that's the role of tech. Tech is there to really enhance, support, advise human beings. So in the role of HR, I think here, as human beings, we all have biases. We all know that. And here, the goal of the technology is to come and serve the equity aspect that we all need in society. So one of our biggest sentence at Degrader is technology should be at the service of equity, and diversity should be at the service of technology. But I'll go a bit deeper later on regarding that. But if we start by saying that technology should be at the service of equity, then how do we start? How do we achieve this? How do we go from where we are to where we want to actually where we want to go? And here, this is what we do is that we've decided to really challenge the data that was used to make a recruitment decision, to make internal mobility decision, to make development decisions. We really want to here come analyze the data that was there for a very long time within companies, and really come clean the data from scratch to provide this new clean data to feed their algorithm. So in companies, you know, they all use today HCM, so human resources management system. They use ATS, so applicant tracking system, and all these big software, this big program, actually are using AI to increase their performance internally. The issue with that is that the companies are using the data, historical data that was there from previous successful recruitment. So let's take an example, for instance, where in a firm, a company only recruited men, for instance. They're not saying that women can do the job, but they just recruited men. Then their AI would actually be trained on certain data that do not reflect society. So the biases coming from the human decision that was made in that company, even though it was not racist decision or it was not meant to discriminate, this decision that were made will actually be reflected by the AI, and the decisions that will be made by the AI will actually reflect the biases found from the human beings, from their past decisions. So, I mean, we all have biases. I mean, I will just list maybe a couple of them. So you have the affinity bias, meaning that if I meet somebody who actually behave a bit like me, I will tend to have a better affinity. I will tend to click much earlier in the process than with somebody maybe who I don't have a common interest or common areas of interest. You also have perception bias, where you will meet someone and you might have assumption about that person. You might have some kind of stereotypes maybe regarding the person's culture. And you also have confirmation bias. So confirmation bias will be, I meet you, I have a certain idea about you, and I will drive my question. I will tend to confirm the idea that I have of you. These are confirmation bias. So all these bias are unconscious. We do it. It's almost natural. We've been trained. We grew up with a certain culture, certain education, certain environment that actually cultivate this bias. But it doesn't mean that we mean to discriminate. So that's why we are considering these biases to bring technology and make sure that we can reveal these biases at the very, very early beginning of the decision tree, of the recruitment process, to make sure that we don't enhance the bias, but we actually raise a red flag saying, hey, be careful here, we might have some bias towards a certain people. So that's why I think it's very important to actually first really take into account the aspect of data, the fact that algorithms themselves are not biased is the data, but it's not only the data, it's also the people behind the data. So we'll go for it a bit after. Another aspect that I would like to come up with today is the fact that we have a rise of new and atypical profiles in society. We all used to follow a certain career path. We all used to maybe pursue one job, one role in our career. It is not the same today. We really have a rise of a profile who are more out of the box, who are following another type of training path, who are maybe deciding to pursue one role than another. I can take only myself, for example. I've been a recruiter, I've been a waitress, I've been working as a consultant, I've done so many different things, but it doesn't define me. The roles do not define me. I'm defining myself with the skills that I have. And today we need to actually take that shift from a role-based talent management practice and talent management, yes, to a more skill-based. It's the skills that matter. We need to enhance the skills. We need to promote the skills of people that will indeed, at the end, help out companies and provide the right vision for the companies for their growth and their innovation. So if we have this right of talents who are coming out of the box, but we still use the same reading grids within companies, and we still use the same way of working, we will not be able to capture these new talents. So the companies will never be able to actually tap into the full talent pool. And here, with what we do with the AI that we put into place, the skill cloud that we're building, we really want to bring that objectivity around skills to make sure that we are, I wouldn't say judging, because judging is quite bad, but we are assessing candidates, we are assessing our employees based on the skill set, based on what they can do, on the tasks that they can execute, rather than on their entire profile, on the personality, on who they are. It's more about what they can do and not on who they are. So what we want is to make sure that these companies can find the talents that we have in society that are not found through the normal and the I would say the existing communication channels that we know and that companies are using. So the fact that you can have more objectivity, more equity, that you're really using tech to enhance the potential, to spot the potential of people, will ensure that companies can also process skills, process innovation, and can drive equity within the practices within their firm. So there's also a notion of accessibility when we talk about fair practices. When we talk about fair hiring, fair promoting, there's also a notion of accessibility, meaning that if you actually go ahead with the technology and go very far with the technology, but you're leaving people behind, and people are not following your progress, your advancement, then there's also a notion that we will not be able to have sufficient talent within our pool to answer the rising demand. So it's very important to also have this accessibility notion. So what we are building at BigRadar is also this tool, the skill cloud, that will be accessible by companies, but also they will be accessible by talents, so that they can have a look and a view on I would say the landscape of today's roles, the landscape of today's skills, to make sure that with the skills that they have, they can make the perfect choice for themselves that will actually drive them to a fulfilling career. You know, we might all have been through that stage. I remember myself being 18, needing to make the decision, like, hey, like, what do you want to do later? And I had that pressure on my shoulder when I had to make a decision and I didn't know. I don't think that this is the way to go. I don't think that people, youngster, when they actually reaching their 18, 19 years old, they know exactly what role they want to do. Some people do. My mother always wanted to be a nurse. She still is a nurse today. Well done for her. I don't think that is the case for people today. I think that right now the world is much more complicated and it goes so fast, innovation goes so fast that we cannot project ourselves within a role. We project ourselves within something that will bring us a sense of purpose, that will bring us fulfillment. And that can be an industry, that can be a domain, that can be a company itself. But I don't think that is related to a role. So making sure that people can map their skills to the existing skills that exist on the market and that are required on the market will be also the key to ensure that this pool of talent can be used by companies, and that we can also rise the living conditions of people thanks to these jobs. I think that right now we have a lot of I don't think studies show that we have a lot of people who at the same level of education, at the same level of expertise, people with a non-European background are having a much harder time to actually access jobs. They need to apply to jobs 3 times more than people with a European background. So again, it doesn't mean that people don't have these skills. They do have it, but they can't be found. They can't be found by the market, and that is a very big issue. And also people who are not yet where they want to be, we need to help them, support them to reach their potential, to get them where they want, so that they can actually achieve their objective and go for the company that they want, making sure that they can also develop their skill set, but also develop the company and grow with the company. So I was telling you earlier about diversity at the service of technology, because we often talk about data and the fact that data is biased. I want to tell actually that we shouldn't trust tech. We shouldn't trust the technology itself. We should trust the human being behind this technology, because it's always a human who will actually configure this technology, who will actually feed that technology with the data. So it's important that we represent society when we construct, when we build that technology, so that we ensure, when we talked about bias earlier, that, for instance, if we face a decision made by the algorithm that does not reflect society, we can see it, we can spot it at the very beginning, because we have men, women, we have people for different ethnicity, we have people from different age, and their point of view, their world, their normality can be taken into account and can be reflected, and we can enrich our knowledge, we can enrich our intelligence by having all these point of views within the creation and the design of our technology. So diversity is really at the core of everything that we do, and we deeply believe that if we enhance the hiring accuracy of companies thanks to technology and thanks to the more objective aspect of recruiting for skills and not for other reasons, companies will actually tend to have a better performances. So if I will maybe rephrase a bit, but if you increase your hiring accuracy, then you will have a better performance. You will be more productive as a company. Hence, you will have a higher diversity as well. It's all linked. It's all linked. Diversity should not be the goal. Quotas shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be having more accuracy that will then ensure that we'll have more diversity within your firm. So that's where pretty much we are going. That's what we are building right now. That's what we are offering companies. We also do other things than tech, like audits, for instance. We also train, because tech is not enough. tech should be part of a more larger strategy, of a global strategy, of a corporate strategy, to ensure that we really have policies within the firm that is implemented, and not to leave the technology by itself. Otherwise, it will not bring sufficient change. So I'd like to end, because I'm looking at the timing. I would like to maybe to finish by saying the objective here, we talk about AI with social impact, is not to leave anyone behind, is to include everyone in society, to make sure that we give actually a chance for people to access jobs that they wouldn't have access to without AI, without that accessibility of having such a platform, such a tool as a sidekick to support us in our growth. So that's pretty much about Big Greater. Hopefully, well, we have a lot of questions to follow, but I would like to leave the floor to Mark. So Mark, I will mute myself.
Yeah, so after people, let's talk about money, Mark. Go ahead.
Thank you, Fred. Indeed, while preparing the presentation today and talking with Fred for when he asked me very nicely to join the panel today, he told me, well, how can we fund social projects, and more specifically about how can we link AI and tech to these social impact projects? Are there any foundations or philanthropic organizations, or does the public authorities would be ready to fund AI in the future? And so to summarize my point today is that basically on our side, we truly believe that there are a lot of things to do regarding AI and social impact. As I said in the introduction, if we want to have a big impact on very large issues, the use of data or machine learning could be very useful for the future of the social impact sector. And at the same time, what happens, and I will explain it shortly through the different slides, is that actually there is very few money for this type of activities. So as one of my biggest challenge today for this presentation is to make sure that I can address also topics that are relevant for you, but I don't know who is the audience today. So I will go a bit broadly and then focus on AI. I start from the point that we are all interested in the logic of finding solution to societal problems, whatever they could be, from environment, inclusion, social, healthcare, COVID, culture. There are, I mean, the world is facing many challenges for centuries, and it hasn't stopped in 2020 or 2021. And the way our society has been structured, and I will here speak maybe more from a European perspective or even Belgium, is that these social problems are taken in charge by different types of actors. Would it be the non-profit sector, the public sector, or the private sector? Within the non-profit sector, what we call civil society, we have citizens that decide to work together to structure their approach in order to be as efficient as possible in terms of finding the solution for social problems. And in the same time, we have the public sector and private sector that within their own missions, sometimes they're obviously directed to working on these social problems, and sometimes not. We shall see in the future how they divide themselves between these two logics. And how does the non-profit sector would be funded? There are two main sources. Would it be from the public authorities, ministries, regions, or also from philanthropy? And when we talk about philanthropy, we'll see that it's a broad word for many different things. Why are we talking about philanthropy today? Is that because we are pretty convinced at TELUS that philanthropy or impact investing can be very good sources for innovation, to find, launch movements, eradicate problems. If you're interested in this type of topics, I advise you to read a great article about audacious philanthropy from the Harvard Business Review that goes very deeply into 10 major social problems that have been eradicated, or at least where philanthropy really played a very strong role in changing the dots. So philanthropy is not as seen as just charity. You give money and you hope that the solutions will arise. Philanthropy can be very strategic, can be very also looking for ambitious changes in the world, and that's where AI can also play its role. Just a few numbers. So we start with the same view on what does the philanthropic sector looks like in Belgium. 63% of Belgians give every year to nonprofits, with an average of 252 euros per person. So which is pretty interesting in terms of number. We are in the average of Europe, a bit upside, but it means that in terms of, if we look at data and the number of people that give, it's pretty much. We have a bit less than 2,000 philanthropic foundations in Belgium. You might also know the King Baudouin Foundation, which is playing a specific role in this world of these 2,000 foundation, because itself is what we call an umbrella foundation, which is gathering nearly 1,000 foundations of funds within its own structure. And then you have also companies that are also doing philanthropy. 1 out of 2 give money to charities with an average of 35,000 euros per year per SME. So it's somehow a market which is pretty important. 10% of the population work in the nonprofit sector. But what does AI fit there? So if we just to give an example of this model, let's talk about education. Belgium is one, based on the OECD, is one of the country where we have the highest inequality in the school system, which means that if you are born from a low economic background, your probability to end school without dropping or without having any failure during your school trajectory is pretty intense. And so to address these issues, you have more or less 300 nonprofits located everywhere in Belgium that try to do something about that. But you also have the school networks, and in Belgium we have many school networks, would be from Flanders to the French-speaking country and you also have the private sector that might address things. Here, very specifically for Belgium, you have few things related to inequality in private sector. But in some countries it might happen, so I still put it in this on the slide. And so these nonprofits are financed by foundations, corporates, and citizens, but also by ministries of education. Here also we have several ministries of education in Belgium. And so what's interesting is that if you look back on the other side, from the perspective of a foundation, you would say I have the possibility to fund 300 different nonprofits. Some are very efficient, some others might not be. But the issue is that for decades, these foundations, so we talk about millions of euros that have been spent in these nonprofits. And at the end of the day, what happens is that the high inequality in Belgium is still there. And we don't see an evolution on this issue. That's why we believe that one of the biggest issues faced by these champions is that, leading organization that we really would like to have a systemic impact on the issue they are addressing, is that they don't get any scale. It's very difficult to find. If I would ask you to put a list of 5 nonprofits active in the education that have a massive impact on the issue, like I don't know, the Red Cross or the Ärzte ohne Grenzen, Médecins Sans Frontières, it would be very difficult for you to identify them. So these nonprofits. Many of them are like little bees around the problem. They have the very big difficulty to enter into the system and to really crack the issue. These nonprofits obviously work also with the public sector, but also with very weak links between the two. So AI could obviously help the issue on 2 sides. First, they could help to increase the fundraising. So there are more and more nonprofits that are using AI to identify potential donors, increase the retention rates, analyze the donor data to personalize appeals. And so we see that obviously as a growing trend in the fundraising aspect. But for the nonprofits themselves, in terms of the quality of the service they can provide, and really to help them to accelerate the change in the problems there and the solutions they're trying to address. It's obviously a great way to reach a great number of people, capacity to address them also personally, and also to evaluate the impact they have. So all the question of impact measurement that we have in the philanthropic sector is increasing, because we want to make sure that each euro that we will be spending on the nonprofit is also efficient. To give an example in this context, I don't know if you know about the Khan Academy, which was launched in the US, and then the nonprofits had really a huge scale over the last decade all over the world, and also in Belgium, which is an organization that some of our clients has decided to fund. And so basically it started like small videos at the really beginning on mats that are for free. You can see them on YouTube or on their website. And so what's great is that you can also look as many times as you want your mat exercise. But on top of that, you have also practices where you can also test your abilities, and from there you can put also the logarithm that can help you to define more precisely where you have to focus your next lessons. My last slide, to be still on time with my 10 minutes, will be more specifically about the funding. And so what is interesting today is that there obviously there is very few foundations or philanthropic actors that consider seriously AI as a force for good. So there are today more and more articles on that. And if you compare the money which is spent in the investment for-profit companies that use AI, which is increasing year by year, roughly. I mean, you have the two graphs on the right side of the presentation, so where we get to the 10 billion today of investment in these companies. While if you would compare that to philanthropy, we would be only talking about a few millions. And for many reasons, I would just point out two more specifically. First of all, the weak knowledge of the sector, and the speed of change that for which people are not equipped. So you have many people working in the nonprofit sector that just not digital people, and on top of that, as they're very human-centric, because they decided to work in the philanthropic sector for this human aspect, they see it's more dogmatic fear. They see AI as the human that will be replaced by machines, and that reflects also to the point of Leila a few minutes ago. And so how can it be balanced? Because they really see like a little like the devil coming in the nonprofit sector, and dehumanizing all the relations. Last thing on this, I wanted to, for the ones that might be there and also thinking about, well, I would like to fundraise for my AI solution. Maybe a few tips for addressing things. I don't think today there are many foundations that would fund AI for the sake of funding AI. The point would be more really understanding the challenge you want to be tackling with the environment or education, culture, healthcare. We spoke about it before. And from there, once you have really understood what is the point that you really want to address, really investigate, okay, can AI address this issue? And from there, you will be looking at a foundation, active in education or healthcare or culture, where your solution, with the potential of really being systemic and really reaching hundreds of thousands of millions of people, can be for a lower cost per people, could be also a very unique selling proposition in your proposal and request for funding. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marc. So yeah, thank you very much, Mark. We're going to move into questions in a few minutes. Just I would like to give you a short intro about data governance, because that's also something that we are working on, and that is really important. Just one small point, but we can talk about it during the question time. What you are mentioning, Mark, is that AI is really difficult for foundation to invest in. I mean, that's something that I see as well a lot. And one of the reasons is that for many foundations, the key question now is how to scale up AI projects and how to bring AI at scale. And that's one of the major issues when you talk to the social sector, because as you mentioned, it's not that the social sector is very advanced when it comes to skill sets and technical skill sets. And so bring some AI solution at scale is difficult. And it's also difficult because the people you are trying to target are sometimes very much disconnected, in the sense that they are not part of the digital world. And so it's hard for foundations to target them. And there are some foundations doing that in the US. We have like McGovern Foundation and also JPEGO, which is part of Johns Hopkins, trying to work on AI investments. But it's indeed very hard. Let me share my screen as well very shortly, because we have 8 minutes left, and I would like to keep some time for at least a short discussion or answering some questions. So on data governance, the main point is, the starting point is what would be a world without data governance, or what would be a world without governance when it comes to AI? And not going into the details here, but mostly talking about data algorithms. If you imagine a world where there is no governance for data, for instance, and Laila was talking about it, you have all the biases that you can imagine in the data, and you have algorithms to assess and to estimate these biases. You put data that are biased into an algorithm, and then you see how biased the outcomes, the recommendations from the algorithm are. So it's possible to have an estimation of the bias. It's not of an algorithm. It's possible to have an estimation from the bias coming from the data. So you need to be able to have like some form of governance on the data. For instance, using data without individual data without privacy, you can end up in situations where basically you have a very controlled and paternalistic society. And you can also stigmatize entire segments of population. So that's why having like data, some form of data governance is important. On algorithms, similarly, if transparency of the algorithms is not guaranteed, basically people are going to lose trust in the algorithm, and it's going to be very hard for public institutions to control the algorithm, to have like some form or shape of democratic control. We all know that you cannot really have some full control on the algorithms, because sometimes it's highly technical, and we talk about civil servants, and they don't have all the time the technical skills to check that. But you need some form of transparency, so that intuitively, as a check and as a regulator, whether the algorithm is totally biased or not, and what is the logic behind the algorithm, I would say. One way to look at data governance is obviously to look at regulation, and many people, including people from MIT, have been working on this, and everybody thinks that the next generation of AI will be shaped by opportunities and regulation. So that's why having a strong regulator, by strong I don't mean a harsh regulator, but a regulator that is smart enough and knows how to basically use data and promote algorithms, or promote the use of the intelligent use of AI, has the capacity to promote intelligent use of AI, I would say. And that's always a challenge, by the way, because most of the regulators across the world, and especially in the EU, are vastly undercapitalized somehow, underfunded. What are the trends when it comes to data and data regulation? So what you see is that the European Commission has been very active over the last 3 years. GDPR has been set up the tone on defining the digital rights of the citizens. Then other regulation like PSD2, ethic guidelines, data strategy, AI strategy, Digital Market Act, Digital Services Act. So it's basically creating the new market. The goal is really to create a new market and a single market for data. And it's going to go into the Data Governance Act that should come soon in 2021. And I think that Lucia earlier today has been talking about it. Lucia is from the European Commission. And then in 2022, we're going to talk about the Cloud Regulation Rulebook and European Cloud Service Marketplace, because it's good to have like rules to regulate data and govern data. But if you don't have the technical infrastructure like the cloud to basically have the data flowing around the continent, that's going to be problematic. By the way, a very good and strong example of data governance, it comes from the PSD2 regulation, which promotes fintech companies and the usage of bank data. So very quickly, you need to be regulated. You need to have data governance, because you can have a lot of insights from being very granular, but it comes with risk. And having an ethics committee, for instance, that's what we set up during the Data Against Corona task force in Belgium to help the government. We set that up. One other solution is to build data ecosystems. Data ecosystems is about community, technical tools, and governance. An example of data ecosystem could be around a topic like wash your hands with P&G, schools, government or private sector, public sectors, telecom operators. Ultimately, the dream, or my dream, is going into data democracy, which is allowing people to individually, to the citizens, to share the data and to have a full control of the data, tracking and tracing of the data. Who are using my data for what purpose, at what time, etc. And even to trade the data, by the way. So I'm going to stop there, but I just want to give you a few examples of what we mean by data governance, because I think that that's important. So I know we have only 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop talking now. So if there is any question, please, or if anyone has a remark, please jump in and please take the time.
Well, I can maybe jump in regarding what you just said. It reminds me of this Google deep learning that was launched, I think, in 2015, that was trained on Mein Kampf and became really racist in a couple of hours. That's the issue that we face, indeed. So coming back to the topic of HR, this is what we can also face as a risk if we do not take into consideration this regulation aspect and the fact that there is a regulation system that is a bit higher than enterprises to really give the guidelines of what AI should do and how it should serve their employees and their organizations.
Yeah. One of the questions, I don't know whether you hear me. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. One of the questions that we see here in the chat is, what is the risk associated with this determinization of services in society? Because indeed, I mean, the more we're going to go into like a tech-centered society, the more, I mean, the less space you have somehow for citizens and human beings and human feelings, empathy or creativity. So how do you see this? I mean, is there anyone from you, Mark or Laila, who wants to talk about dehumanization?
Yeah, I can give a try to at least to start the debate. I was giving you this example of this Khan Academy where students can study their maths or whatsoever on the internet. And somehow it could be, I mean, some teachers might see that as the end of teaching, because for the time being, for the last decades, they were always the ones that were giving the knowledge and the students were listening to the knowledge. Today, the knowledge is everywhere on your tablet, phone, or computer. So the point is not so much that the teacher will be doing this, but and giving the knowledge because it's there, but it gives a total different also role to the teacher, because so we can start with distance learning, but also within the schools make peer-to-peer trainings between students and give the chance to the teachers also to be the ones that will go deeper into the knowledge of the students rather than just like feeding them with information. So it can be, I don't want to be just looking at the bright side of things, but it can be also very positive on some human aspects, even to increase the role of the people, but just in a different way. This being said, I think that on the other side, it could be used very badly, and so I think that's the point of all AI. Probably in every debate is that it's like every human invention, it can be very positive, but also very, very negative. So, but I just don't want to put it very dark neither.
I can maybe add something to what Mark just said. I think the challenge for companies today, for society, is to know where to place AI, is to know where to use AI. It's about how we want to use it, but it's also where. As Mark mentioned, it gave us the opportunity to actually focus ourselves on more non-cognitive skills, on a more human exchange with a lot of interaction, a lot of engagement. It gives us the opportunity to actually meet people, get to know them, and really enhance this relationship. AI should be there as the sidekick, as I mentioned, to ensure that human can focus on coaching, on advising, on creating the environment that humans need to actually grow, while they focus on other types. And I think companies who will win the AI war will be the companies who understand the importance of humans, who understand how AI should be used, and promote humans in what they do best, and use AI in the easiest task. I would say, as we mentioned, the repetitive task, all the more operational level. So I think that will be the challenge in the coming years, knowing how to use AI, but also where to put the technology to enhance humans' relationship, engagement, and all that.
Well, one of the questions also that I saw in the chat was accountability if there is a mistake. I mean, I think this goes beyond really what we do in social impact. It goes a little bit more into the governance, I think, the governance question. I mean, the governance question is, to a certain extent, it is linked to also the legal system. It's not only that the data governance is something that is self-regulated. There is a legal system in place. And so if you want to move into the accountability question, so basically at this stage, I do believe that everything is on the shoulders of the people developing the algorithms, while it could be a shared responsibility with the people using the algorithms as well. So it's going to depend on the situation, but more or less the idea is that at the end, you can find a person responsible for what's happening. I mean, that's the most important thing. And that's why, and I think that Leila said it in the conversation before, which is we need to have like human decisions at some point. I mean, it's not that the algorithms can take automatic decisions, because specifically there is no accountability that can be put on the shoulders of an algorithm. The accountability is always going to be put on the shoulders of a human being. And so you need, whenever you have that in mind, that's also one of the reasons why you need to have like the final green light or decision being put in the hands of a human being, because it's linked to the legal system. It's linked to the who is going to be responsible for what's happening. So I think that we have passed our time by 3 minutes or 4 minutes already. So I propose we stop there unless there is like a special or a pressing need to share additional thoughts, Leila or Mark. Otherwise, we're going to close here. Anything you want to add?
No, just maybe one last thing, because it was also in the chat, and one of the questions about the bridge between for-profit and non-profit. And so do we really need to fund non-profits in AI rather than for-profit? And that's true that today we have an increasing numbers of tech companies. Would it be ed tech, health tech, whatsoever? You have all the tech that you can imagine that try to address also these social issues. What is interesting is to dig deeper there, and we won't have the time, but about the business model of these companies, and at the end, the point of the data which is used, because many of these companies are obviously not profitable as such, but by the use of the data they have, it starts to be profitable that way. And so we are really in this balance of being non-profit or for-profit. So thank you for the question, and thank you for the panel. And again, for the invitation.
Thank you for coming here. Leila, anything that you want to add?
Well, I will add one thing is that, as we mentioned, as we all are really focused on here is social impact, and is the fact that it needs to be accessible. We can't have a bridge. We can't put a barrier, a wall between humans and technology. It's supposed to actually bring us together, create some synergies. And some people might think that all the youth, because they've been born in that generation with that smartphone, they came out with a smartphone in their hands. Well, it's not because they can use Snapchat or that they can use such application that they really are, that the technology itself is accessible, that they really are onboarded into these transformation, these changes. Like it's a bit like a butterfly, you know, this metamorphosis, and the nature of jobs are changing, society is changing, people are changing, and we need to make sure that all these different changes are actually coming together to create the society that we all want, that we all look for and look up to. So here, to me, it's really important that when we talk about AI, when we talk about social impact, that we really put the human at the center of everything that we do, to make sure that we use it for good. And I think Frédéric can confirm with AI for good and what you do. It really should be the core and should be the focus, and will be the focus with everything that I hear on this panel today and that I've been hearing this week. So really exciting to see what's coming up in the coming month and years regarding progress, technological progress for social good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Leila. I'm going to conclude very quickly. What's striking me is that
you're mute.
We've lost you, Frédéric.
Yeah, I'm here. So what I found striking is that we mostly have people from the private sector while we talk about social impact, and we don't really have people from, I mean, more to a certain extent non-profit, but still, I mean, you are very close to the for-profit. And we don't have anyone from the public sector. So what would be probably interesting is to have like that kind of conversation with also people from the public sector and from the non-profit sector, like NGOs. But the good thing is that that also means that people from the private sector are very involved in trying to solve some market failures and some social impact questions that are really pressing questions today, especially in a world where we have increasing inequalities between people, social and economic inequalities. And so, well, thank you very much, Leila. Thank you very much, Mark, for the panel, and thank you very much for everyone attending the panel and watching us on YouTube.